Hello, Scouted Football Podcast fans. It is Friday, and that means we're back with another episode of the Scouted Pod. What's been happening? Well, a lot, and I'm not just talking about Harry and Meghan's interview with Oprah. The Champions League knockouts delivered yet again, and surprise, surprise, the Norwegian Terminator, Frankenstein's footballer Erling Haaland, was the star of the show yet again, scoring twice amid some typically predictable VAR drama. Celebrating in the face of Sevilla keeper Bono, and then leading incensed Sevilla players on a merry chase like the Pied Piper of Dortmund that he is. Those two goals meant that he reached 20 in the UEFA Champions League in just 14 matches, which is a remarkable effort, especially considering the previous record holder, Harry Kane, managed to reach the 20-goal mark in 24 games. Elsewhere, Porto and Sergio Oliveira knocked out Juventus, Cristiano Ronaldo, and exposed their lack of a draft excluder beneath their wall when defending free kicks. And Liverpool's Nat Phillips and Porto's veteran centre-half Pepe were certainly the defensive stalwarts of this week's round of 16 fixtures. And Barcelona are out, which is no small matter after Paris Saint-Germain and Kylian Mbappe put them to the sword from the penalty spot at Parc des Princes. But we're not here to discuss the Champions League this week, though. As always, I'm joined by an esteemed guest who certainly knows more about this topic than I do, which is Belgian football. Ben Jackson is host of the Belgian Football Pod, which, as you might have guessed, discusses all the goings-on in Belgian football. Ben, how are you going? I'm delighted to have you on.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I'm really good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad at all. I'm just thinking with sort of the roadmap out of lockdown and stuff in the UK here, have you got any beer garden bookings planned for late April? Maybe some Duvals or triples being sampled in some of the spring sunshine?
Oh, I'd absolutely love to say yes, but I just want to get there now. I haven't got anything booked in, man, but yeah, as soon as I can, a nice Belgian beer in the sunshine is just, it's the dream, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the weather has to be spot on as well. But, I'm not going to be fussy when that day comes around, even if it's pouring down. I'm going to be there in my raincoat. But on the topic of the Belgian Football Pod, how long have you been doing that? You've got obviously a few co-hosts with you on there. What is it all about? Just general Belgian football?
Yeah, we started this. Well, I started it on my own, I think, back in July last year during the lockdown. I was like thinking about doing a podcast on it, and just thought, well, I've got loads of time on my hands, I may as well start it. And then Yoris and Scott, who were on the podcast with me, joined me. They offered to help me out, which is great because, when you're just talking to yourself for 45 minutes, it can get a little bit boring and a little bit samey. But we just decided that we're going to cover everything. We're mainly focusing on the domestic league at the moment. So we mainly look at the top league. We're kind of dabbling in the second division. And then hopefully when the Euros come around, we're going to kind of branch out and do a bit more around the national team as well. But we like to keep it impartial. Apart from Yoris, he's our only kind of club fan that we have on the podcast. But me and Scott are very much the neutral two, kind of bringing our opinions to it.
The super serious Belgian Football Podcast hosts, keeping impartiality at the forefront. If you did have a soft spot, if you did have a leaning towards any of the Belgian clubs, because I suppose, to start up a podcast like that, you're going to have an interest of sorts. Who would it be?
Oh, yeah, it's a tough question, really. There's quite a few that I'm I like and I'm interested in. I think this season especially, it's been a KV Oostend. For those that don't know, they were literally, I think they finished third bottom last season. Absolutely terrible. Changed manager, changed style of play, changed everything this year. And they're pushing top four, pushing European qualifications. So I'd say I've got a little bit of a soft spot for them because I quite like that dramatic turnaround and kind of underdogs giving it to the big teams as well. So I'll say Oostend is kind of like a little soft spot. But I'm definitely impartial and kind of like all the teams.
Everyone loves an underdog story, don't they? That's a good one. That's a good justification as any. But in terms of the Belgian Pro League, it's split into sort of a championship group and a relegation group at the end of the season after sort of the regular campaign is finished. And you've also got the top four go into a playoff situation, and then the I think it's 5th to 8th. Correct me if I'm wrong. Go into a second playoff situation. How does the Belgian league work essentially?
That's a very good question. It's actually changed this season as far as I'm aware. I actually had to check with the other guys because I was like, the information's just been changing all the time, and finding an actual source of information for what they're actually doing this year has been quite hard. But so as you said, top four teams contest for the championship. So kind of I think they do it in Poland as well, where they have their points halved. because the idea is it'll make it more competitive. That's not going to happen this year because Club Brugge are like miles ahead of everyone else anyway. And then, these top 4 teams will battle it out for the title as well as qualification for European tournaments. So the first team will qualify for the Champions League. The rest of them then battle it out for the rest of the places. From what I know, and this is my information, I apologise to your listeners if I have this wrong. Second place ends up in the Champions League qualification. So they've got the automatic Europa League spot if they don't get through. The third place team is now going to go into the new Conference League qualification, and then the team that finishes 4th, they will qualify for the Conference League as well, but in order to do that they have to beat the team that finishes 5th. So whoever wins kind of the second playoff between the teams in 5 to 8, who also have their points halved, there's then another playoff between 5th place and 4th place, and whoever wins out of that one will then qualify for the Conference League qualification. And then just to kind of like make it even more complicated, they've added another playoff, which is they've kind of gone for like a German style relegation playoff. So second bottom will play 2 legs against second top in the second tier. Winner of those 2 legs will then be in the first tier. So yeah, it's complicated.
I mean, it sounds complex. I mean, just from when I was looking at the Belgian league table, I was looking at all the different colours which correspond, who qualifies for what position in the Europe. And I was just like, you know what? I'm going to get the Belgian expert to explain this to me, because it's just, it's late at night. It's something that I'm just going to think, you know what? It's not going to fully go in. So having it explained to me, as you have there, has shed a lot more light on it. So thank you very much. But in terms of the excitement factor, then you've certainly got, there's no teams that are going to be have their flip-flops on going into the final few games of the season, because essentially everything could be resting on it.
Yeah, and it's so like convoluted in that middle bit of the table at the moment. If you we were saying the other day, if you take Club Brugge out of the equation, you'd have a really exciting title race going on, because all the teams are within like a couple of points of each other, and then the teams at the bottom aren't, like, no one's really fully safe at the bottom either. So these next few weeks, every game's important and every point matters, which is great. It's like what you want, really, isn't it, in a league? But yeah, it's definitely complicated sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. You always wanted that little added bit of drama, I think, coming to the close at the end of the season. Nobody wants to be stuck in mid-table and just not having anything to play for. I always bring it back to sort of Stoke in the Premier League when they finished 9th. I think it was 3 seasons in a row. It was nobody wants to be a Stoke. Come on, sorry if you're from Stoke. Today's podcast topic is RSC Anderlecht, because it's historically been one of, if not the biggest club in Belgium. They've won 34 titles, most recently in 2016-17. They've won the UEFA Cup in 1983, the UEFA Club World Cup and Super Cup in 1976 and 1978. They've got pedigree, and they're a historic club, especially in terms of the youth academy as well, and signing players very young and then bringing them through and then selling them on for a massive profit further down the line to bigger clubs in bigger European leagues. So from a scouted football perspective, Anderlecht are always a club that we have maybe not a really close eye, but we've always got them in the back of our minds, thinking, well, sooner or later there are going to be some very good players coming through here. You just need to look at the alumni. Romelu Lukaku was there between the age of 13 and 18. Youri Tielemans was there for 15 years before he moved away from Belgium. Dries Mertens was there for his sort of early developmental teenage years. Vincent Kompany, who we'll get onto, Leander Dendoncker at Wolves, Dennis Pratt at Leicester, and going even further back, Enzo Schifo back in the day. But as well as that, they also had Alexander Mitrovic, who was there, who not an academy graduate, but was brought in from Partizan Belgrade as a teenager and really set the Belgian league on fire at that time, around 2015. But going back to Vincent Kompany, and for anybody who isn't aware, Vincent Kompany, when he left Manchester City, or sort of semi-retired from Manchester City, he became the player coach of Anderlecht in 2019. Got off to a terrible start, and then just became just a player again. And now he's the coach again. Last season, they finished 8th. which was because the season was obviously curtailed by coronavirus. But how was that sort of received? In terms of Belgian football, seeing Anderlecht slump to eighth. I know they'd been on a bit of a slide, going from third or fifth to sixth and then eighth. How was that received in Belgium?
Yeah, I guess like people weren't that surprised. Guess we're like in terms of stuff we'll kind of get on to talking about as to why this has kind of happened to Anderlecht. But yeah, like when you look at their history, and like you talked about their history there, like titles, like this team's always competing. They're always near the top of the league. They're always pushing in cup competitions. They're qualifying for Europe. They're doing all these things. So to see a side like that kind of slumping in mid-table was bizarre. And yeah, I think as well, when you if you just look at the table, you can see the problem straight away is that they just drew so many games. Like they just could not find a way to win the games that they should have. And it's kind of repeating itself a little bit this season as well. Like the same issues are kind of there. And yeah, like you said, Vincent Kompany, he did get off to a bad start last year. He had to step down. I guess he was kind of saved in a way because the reason that had to be given was he didn't actually have the right license. So he didn't have the correct license to be a coach at the level. He's now working towards it, so he's allowed to manage this season. But yeah, so he wasn't allowed to continue as a coach. He just had to become a player. But yeah, it didn't go very well. And now he's kind of come back. So they brought someone else and then they've sacked that person. Because the issue still persisted, and now he's back again for kind of like a second crack at the coaching job.
Anybody who's had such an impact on English football as Vincent Kompany has over the past decade, it's going to attract some interest from an English audience or a British audience, I think, in Anderlecht in 2021, essentially. But last season being the first year since 1964 that Anderlecht didn't compete in European competition at any level, including the qualifiers. I think that was, it spoke to their slump a little bit more. They were on this bit of a slide. Financially, there were problems. Are they still present today? Because we see with this Anderlecht team, who we'll get onto in a bit. They've got very, very young players. They're a very young squad. They've got. I don't think it's between the numbers of 2 and 7 they don't have in the squad. Which is usually you'd correspond the first team players, the senior players would have lower down numbers. But are the financial problems still prevalent, or is there some? Because I'm aware there's been ownership changes. Has there been some sort of effort to rectify this?
Yeah, there's definitely still financial problems. And to be fair, like just kind of jumping back to Kompany quickly, this season, he has begun to sort out some of the issues that were there. Like defensively, they're a lot better as the season's progressed. Although lots of people in the media are kind of saying if he wasn't Vincent Kompany, there's no way he would have survived as long as he has. So kind of like the legend status bringing him through. And like you said, kind of like as someone who watched him a lot in the Premier League, I want him to succeed. I think he's a bit of a legend of football in general in my like kind of time growing up. But yeah, he's got to deal with financial problems. And if you just look at the squad this year, and if you look at their transfer dealings, a lot of their players are on loan. And that's just the biggest indicator, isn't it? That they can't afford to buy players. They're just loaning a lot of players in because it's just a cheaper option for them. And it's kind of come off the back of a really terrible period of spending, as well as this kind of a situation that's unfolding that, yeah, I don't think we have time to get into now. And I still don't know all the details about. There's like court cases and there's involvement of an agent who basically made himself a lot of money out of Anderlecht signings. But yeah, like before this podcast, I was just having a little kind of look back at all the signings they've made over the past couple of seasons. And when you look at the big money they've spent, it just hasn't brought about any returns. Like you're not seeing the players that you used to see. Like you talked about Mitrovic earlier, he was someone they brought in and sold him on for big money. The players they brought in recently haven't been able to do that. They brought in Stanku from Steaua Bucharest, who I believe is still their record signing. He's now playing for Slavia Prague. Like he's not at the club anymore. They bought Boubacar Sane from FC Midtjylland. He cost them, I think, around about 8 million euros. He spent the last 2 seasons out on loan. He's not really getting a look in the first team, which is just, yeah, bizarre when you spent that much money and you're having defensive problems. And he's not that young. I think he's about 23. He's not getting a look. Michel Vlap, as listeners probably know, he's now on loan at Arminia Bielefeld. Landry de Mata, they bought him in for some money from Wolfsburg. He's now gone to Espanyol. Kemar Roof, now at Rangers. They bought him for some money. Like all these players are kind of in their top 10 most expensive players ever. but none of them are there anymore. And it's kind of like you can see why there's been problems in terms of recruitment in that end. And then there's also been problems in terms of wages. And this is where the agent comes in. So there's rumours that Treble, who's there at the moment, not just on his wages, but when he signed for the club, he earned about 3.3 million euros on top of his wages, which is a massive sum of money for a club in the Belgian league where your kind of modus operandi is to get young players through and sell them on for big money. That's just the way you're going to have to survive at the moment. So yeah, financial problems are definitely still there. And in order to kind of rectify that, they have to sell their young players. And in a way, because of the loans and stuff like that, and like you said, with like the squad numbers and stuff, the young players are getting more opportunities than maybe they would have. But Anderlecht have a good academy. They've always had a good academy. So these players are coming through. It's just about exposing them and kind of milking as much as you can out of them for success before you have to sell them because you've got no other choice.
Yeah, exactly. Maximizing their sell-on value, and knowing when to sell. I think there's few clubs in world football who are very good at knowing when to sell. It may not be a popular decision, but sometimes you that player stays 6-12 months longer, and their market value, especially for clubs who rely on player sales as heavily as Belgian clubs will do, then if their market value halves or even quarters in that time, you've lost a substantial amount of income or potential income there. So yeah, I think that will be the next challenge for Anderlecht, definitely. But presently, obviously, we still have Vincent Kompany there. This year, in terms of on the pitch, it seems as though the effect that many thought that a defensive stalwart like Vincent Kompany would have on the team, defensive solidity and the like, that appears to be occurring. They've only Club Brugge have conceded fewer goals than Anderlecht in the Belgian Pro League this season. Is that something that you've seen that's been reflective of the style that Kompany's tried to bring in?
Yeah, I think he definitely deserves a lot of credit for the defensive improvement. Like at the beginning of the season, this definitely wasn't the case. Like there's kind of a joke going around that the best time to score against Anderlecht was just wait until the 80th minute because they were just conceding like shed loads of goals in the last 10 minutes of games. But like you can tell he's worked on that, and you could see him, if he had hair, he'd be pulling it out most of the time when this was happening. Like the frustration was visible on his face. But I think an important signing that they've made has been Matt Miesga on loan from Chelsea. I think he's really helped kind of bring a little bit of leadership to that back four. The problem is that like what Kompany wants to do is he likes to play the possession game. He likes to pass it out from the back. And at times the players just don't look comfortable doing that. But he's like insisted on it and kept doing it. And slowly but surely it's getting a little bit better. But while they're really good defensively, and yeah, like you said, like second best defense in the league, like you can't argue with the improvements he's made there. Going forward, it's been a massive struggle for them. Percy Tau was quite good for them at the beginning of the season. He's gone back to Brighton. That left a gap in terms of creativity. They haven't really filled that. They're very reliant on Lucas Nemetja scoring penalties. I'm sure we'll speak about him later. But yeah, and I think what hasn't helped Kompany as well is that the goalkeeping situation hasn't been ideal. Van Klombrugge, who's their first choice keeper, has been injured for quite a while now. And poor old Vellenreuter has been like the backup keeper, and he's made a couple of mistakes for them to concede some goals. A few weeks ago against Kortrijk, he literally just like punched the ball into one of the attacking players for them to concede. And the problem is when they do concede, they find it quite hard to then go on and score because they struggle to score. Like they're still drawing games because if they concede, they maybe score one, or if they score one and then concede, like that's not really going to help them. So yeah, he's definitely improved that end. It's now kind of, he's got to focus on the attacking end to really make a properly balanced team.
In terms of players, and we've obviously discussed young players playing a major role at Anderlecht this season, mainly because of the financial concerns, not being able to buy players, having to bring them through the prestigious academy that they have. One of the younger players who's played a starring role, I think, over the past 2 seasons, despite some difficult times, is Albert Sambi Lukonga, who is a deep line number 8, very good dribbler, very good at beating players, getting through pressure, makes lots of progressive runs from midfield. And one of the things that I found quite interesting, sort of just watching Lukonga, is that, for a deep line midfielder, he's not quite a defensive midfielder. He doesn't get through a great deal of defensive work that you may associate with players who are good at escaping pressure, who can be just as good disruptively as well. I quite like how he's good at picking passes in the final third. His his pass selection is quite good for a player so young. And progressing play in sort of those dangerous spaces, because we see often young players are very good up until that final moment where their pass maybe is a bit misguided or isn't as accurate as it could be, or they just start again, turn around, pass back to where they came from. But Lukonga appears to have sort of got that refined down to a bit of a science, because he's very good at playing those incisive balls, and from his position, it's always more difficult when you have less of the pitch in front of you. So from that number 8, I've been very much impressed with Lukonga. I mean, what have your views of him been when you've seen Anderlecht play?
Yeah, no, I'm a massive Lukonga fan. Anderlecht games haven't always been the most exciting to watch, but he's exciting to watch. Like you said, I think the biggest thing you notice is the way he can just pick up the ball and take it a couple of 10, 15, 20 yards down the field, beat a couple of players. He gets fouled so often. I think there was a game earlier in the season I watched where he played against Beerschot, and he was just running rings around them. His progression from and transition play was just causing them all sorts of problems, because he'd just take players out of the game for fun. Yeah, I know what you mean about the defensive work. You don't really notice him in that role. Even though he's deep and then picking it up and taking it and going. And I think playing a lot aside Josh Cullen's kind of had to do more of the defensive work to allow Lukonga to play. I think the problem Lukonga's found is that with Tau gone, all the kind of creative pressure's been put on his shoulders. And so teams are kind of looking to stop him as often as possible, because if you stop him, you kind of stop Anderlecht playing. One team that didn't do that early in this season was Genk. There was a game where they just didn't put any pressure on him, and he just looks in so much control. Like you said, his passing was fantastic. I think they only won 1-0, but the amount of chances he created for the side was just ridiculous. He should have better numbers in terms of assists than that this season, but he's kind of just been let down by the players around him. He is, in my mind, their biggest asset at the moment, without a shadow of a doubt. He's been given the captaincy as well. He's a leader on the pitch. He just, everything he does just oozes with class, and he's just a quality technician as well. I'd be very, very, very shocked if he is still there next season. I think, like we talked about, knowing when the right time to sell is, I think his kind of price tag's only going up at the moment, and I'd be shocked if there aren't clubs already having conversations with Anderlecht about him.
Yes, certainly. I mean, I completely echo everything you've said there. I mean, I haven't sat down and watched an Anderlecht game, per se, those 90 minutes, but sort of going back on Instat, watching Lukonga's games, and it really is just a repetition of, taking the ball, carrying the ball 10, 15, 20 yards up the pitch. And it is just that escaping the pressure. It sticks out so much, especially in tight games where, it's very nip and tuck. There's not very much being given away, and then as soon as they funnel the ball through him, it's very much the impetus is there. It's almost like this spark has been generated. So I'm very keen to see sort of where he ends up, because ultimately his future is not in Belgium. It will be in one of Europe's top 5 leagues, which I suppose sort of takes me on to the next question. The next point I was really going to make was, where do you perhaps see Lukonga fitting in? Because obviously, we've seen the likes of Tanguy and Ndombele go from Lyon to Tottenham Hotspur, and Ndombele, while probably having a bit more to his game destructively, was very good at that ball progressing role in Liga. I think we've seen a lot of players with that similar sort of mold in Liga, and I'd say that in terms of the step up in quality, perhaps going to a Europa League challenging Liga side, might be a good step for him. We only need to look at Eduardo Camavinga at Rennes and see that when he opens his legs, I mean, he may be three years younger, I believe, than Lukonga, but when he really opens his legs and gets moving, he does make some real inroads in through Liga midfields and defenses. So I can see something very similar happening. with Lukonga if Ligue 1 was a place that he went to. But I was just interested to see if you thought he could maybe take a similar path to someone like Orel Mangala at Stuttgart and go to the Bundesliga and perhaps do well there, or whether you also think that Ligue 1 might be a good avenue.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with everything you're saying. Kind of like when you talk about Camavinga, like Camavinga is one of those players, like you said about Lukonga, like you watch him, he's just exciting. And you get like when he gets on the ball, you're like, okay, something's going to happen here. And that's what I feel about with Lukonga. And I think because he's actually like physically, he's quite mature and he's got the physical ability to like beat players and get fouls and stuff. And Belgium is a physical league. I feel like he can kind of go Bundesliga, he can go League, and he could eventually be in the Premier League as well. Like I think he has that in him. He's got the ability he needs. It just kind of depends on just getting to the right club. I think that's the big thing, like getting to a club that's going to give him the chances and play him. I think he could be in the Bundesliga. I'd like to see him in the Bundesliga. We've got another player from Belgium going to Wolfsburg and Asterflanks, another like exciting youngster. And I feel like someone like Wolfsburg could play quite well at someone like that. Yeah, like a Stuttgart, someone like that sort of team. He'd be really, really like interesting to see him in. And all I really hope is that he goes somewhere he's going to get game time and he'll be allowed to develop, because I feel like he's been able to do that at Anderlecht, and the more game time he gets, just the better he's going to get.
Yeah, somewhere that he's going to be allowed to develop and continue to mature. But he's going to be appreciated and respected essentially for the player that he is. I think that's always going to be very important, especially with players when they make that first move. It can often be the move that is most important in their career, because it if you do it very well at the lesser league, for want of a better term, and then you may maybe make a misguided move to a club which perhaps doesn't suit you as well, then there's always going to be the question mark over, well, he couldn't do it in this league. Whereas it may have been a completely different story if that player goes to a club where they are very much suited to the style of play. So I agree with you there in the sense that he does need to go somewhere where he's going to get game time in a system that suits him. And in terms of his development, Anderlecht have not been doing well these past 2 years, but you contrast that with Lukonga's own personal development, and you see that there is massive potential there, because a player who has really burst onto the scene and played a real protagonist's role over the past 2 years, past 18 months in a not a poor team, but a team that have been flagging. That's always a good sign that despite what's going on around him, he is developing. So yeah, I've got very, very high hopes for Lukonga. Elsewhere in midfield, there is a young Belgian international, Youri Tielemans, who is 2 years younger than Lukonga, actually. He's still only 19. And Ben, you'll have a better grasp than I do, but he's coming back from injury. I believe he's just come back from injury. He's diminutive. He's creative. He's good at escaping through these little tight spaces. He's played in lots of different areas. But in this sort of the 4-3-3 that Anderlecht currently have, it's possession based. It's tight at the back. It likes to play out from the back and use the defensive players and fullbacks in build up. Where does Tielemans fit into this Anderlecht team under Vincent Kompany?
Yeah, no, interesting. Tielemans is quite an interesting case study, I guess, for like what Anderlecht are going to do in terms of, are they going to have to change their style when he comes back? I think I like what you said about him being diminutive, because it kind of leads back to Anderlecht making the mistake with Dries Mertens back in the day, where they decided he was too small to make it at the club, and now look what he's gone on to do. So with Tielemans, they're definitely not going to make that mistake again. I think personally, from a personal point of view and wanting entertainment, like I want to see Tielemans on the pitch as often as possible. I think because he can play out wide, he can fit into their 4-3-3. Or I'd quite like them to stick him into that midfield three, and you can maybe have Cullen just anchoring the midfield, and then you have Lukonga, Tielemans doing different things to be the creative spot, because they need creators in that team. Like they just haven't got players that are creative enough to provide for the other like attacking players that they have. So yeah, he's really young. He's like got so much potential. There's so much excitement, and it was really, really just unfortunate the way he got injured. Like he just seemed to be getting into a little bit of a role and a little bit of form, and he was starting to really like come into his own in games and stuff. And I think, to be fair to Kompany, like when we talked about Lukonga, and now we're talking about Rocher, and like with the young players, I think he does give them confidence because they look up to him. Like they've watched this guy play in his prime and like for the national team. Like he is an icon, he is a legend of the game in Belgium. So for these players, they will listen to him and they'll respect what he says. So personally, I think what they'll do is they'll probably play him on the wing to begin with, but I think eventually I think Kompany may just be able to be a little bit like flexible with his tactics in terms of where he wants to play Vishan, depending on the team they're playing against. Like if they're going to have lots of possession, just stick him in the middle so you can kind of like move around and create the spaces that you need and kind of drop in between the lines a bit more. But yeah, it's quite hard to kind of gauge with Kompany what he's going to do because we haven't seen that much of Rashan this season, at least under Kompany as the main like decider in terms of tactics and stuff. But he's definitely like Lukonga. Yeah, he's kind of a little bit behind Lukonga in terms of like, I don't think he'll get a move in the summer or anything like that. I think he does need to come back from injury, play out the rest of the season, and then kind of hit the ground running next season, get a full year under his belt then to really show what he can do.
Yeah, I mean, when I've watched Verscheren, it's been obviously with Belgium's younger teams, their youth teams, the 21s, 19s, and that sort of thing. And obviously, he made his debut recently for the national team. But just looking at it from that perspective, he has the one of the biggest potentials in this Anderlecht team. He's one of the best potential assets. Surely you'd want to maximize that. And when I look at him, I think, yeah, you can play on the wing, you can be a good wide man, but is that going to be the best? I mean, you mentioned that the Belgian league is a physical league. Is that going to be the best place to utilize him? Is the formation that's being played currently actually going to be the best that is going to potentially maximize his market value and sort of maximize his own reputation? I mean, I have questions over that, but I mean, ultimately, Vincent Kompany is going to have to answer those with how he uses them, because he's back from, or I believe he is returning from injury. I think he only played a couple of minutes in the most recent game against Mechelen?
Yeah,
and
it was
essentially
like his first one back.
Yeah, and I think technically, I think his ability is akin to that of a player in a faster, higher quality league. It's just whether that. I mean, you don't want to make the Dries Mertens mistake, because Jesus, that is a bad one. But I don't want to sort of see in 2 years' time Verscheren still be there and think, well, what could have been. He burst onto the scene as a Belgian international very young, at 17, 18 years old, and now one injury. I mean, even with the injury, it'll be interesting to see how he comes back from that, because a lot of the time it can really restrict players' mobility to begin with. So I think I'm hoping for a strong end to the season for him, and I'm hoping that we can perhaps see him do well in that wide role. Prove me wrong, essentially. So yeah, I've got hopes for him.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think as well, like what may help him kind of be able to play more in the middle as well is that they do have some other wingers that are exciting there. They've got Amazu who can play on the right wing. They've got Mukaru who can play on the left wing. And Kompany seems to quite like these two as his wingers. So maybe that'll be the chance for Sharon needs to go more centrally and just kind of get on the ball more.
Yeah, I think getting on the ball is an important point. I rambled on a bit just before then, but essentially what I was trying to get out was that I feel like the team will play better because of his technical quality being perhaps already at that level, which is in the upper echelons of the Belgian Pro League. He is going to be sort of in the top percentiles for creative numbers if he gets a consistent run. So yeah, it'll be an interesting one to keep tabs on. Up front, though, you mentioned, of course, that Anderlecht had utilised the loan market quite extensively, both incoming and outgoing. And Lucas Nmecha has come in from Manchester City. Great record at under 23 level he had in England, and then subsequently earned some loans. His first one being to Preston North End, where I think he got 3 goals in around 40 games. I can't say that I watched very much of Nmecha at Preston or his subsequent loan at Middlesbrough, but sort of going back through the through the X files, it just seemed as though there was a player there who had the physicality to compete, but perhaps was just lacking the necessary gel to really make it. So I was interested to hear that obviously he got the loan move to Anderlecht, and even more intrigued to find that he's been, albeit scoring a few penalties, but he's been finding the back of the net quite regularly. Would you say that in the formation that Kompany plays, is this the system that you think is probably playing to Nmecha's physical strengths?
Yeah, I think so. I think, like what you said, he is clinical from the spot. And I think it's kind of unfortunate that a lot of his goals have just been penalties, because it takes away from like his all-round game. But yeah, he's like, when he came the first time, the first game I watched him play, I think it was away at Oostend, and it was the first time we saw an Anderlecht striker make a run in behind the whole season. I was like, finally, like someone that's going to stretch the play a bit. And that's what he does quite a bit. Like, he runs the channels really well for them. He likes to get on the ball. He likes to hold it up. He's quite good on the ball as well. And like you said, he's physical. So he's physical and he's got some technical ability. And I think I've watched him, like at the beginning he was quite selfish. So he'd get it and he'd kind of have like tunnel vision. I'm just going to run and try and shoot. And that just isn't, that's never going to work. Like, that might work at under 21 level, but when you make that step up, like, it's never going to work at the pro level. The other week they played Antwerp, and I watched the 90 minutes of that, and he didn't score, but I think it was his best game. Like, he held the ball up really well. He was really putting the defenders under a lot of pressure, running the channels, making the right passes. Like, his decision making just looked like it's got so much better. And Anderlecht fans absolutely love him at the moment. Obviously they can't be in the stadium, but they brought a banner out of the training ground basically begging him to stay for another year. And I kind of, he's kind of come out and said he wants to get a spot in the Man City team. He kind of said, obviously I understand Aguero is a better player than me, but that's what I want to do. I'm kind of sick of bouncing around. I just want to prove that I can make it at this level. But he's also said he's happy to come back to Anderlecht at the same time. So I think from like a development level, another season in Belgium could do him really good, because his confidence is sky high at the moment. You can see it, like the way he takes the penalties. You just don't think he's going to miss. Like, you can just see it on his face. He's a confidence player, and his all-round game outside of the penalties, like, I hope that just doesn't get ignored, because he has been so much better as the season's gone on.
Yeah, and it was something that I toyed with, because I hadn't actually seen a great deal of him at Anderlecht, and then I looked at his numbers and I thought, okay, he's got a lot of goals there, and then you actually dig into them and you see that around half of them are penalties, and you think it is that you're just like, oh well, they're all penalties, like, oh
Yeah,
that's a bit easy, isn't it? But first of all, in and of itself, it is it's a good attribute. There are plenty of players who don't score penalties at the sort of the expected rate, whereas he's pretty much putting every single one that has been put on his plate as an Anderlecht player. And just on that really, what is it about Anderlecht in the way they play? Is it the individuality of Mukiri and Amuzu on the wings that is perhaps maybe getting more penalties than their competitors?
yeah, it's quite hard to kind of get at, like, why are they getting them so often. I think obviously with the advent of VAR, like, you're just getting more penalties anyway because things are getting picked up. But
Yeah, true.
I think as well, because it's weird, because they lack in creativity. So that's why I think he's a bit unfortunate in that, because they aren't as creative, they don't create as many chances for him as he would get in other leagues. So like, it's like, I've got this one chance, I better put these penalties away. So yeah, I think they do, because the way they keep the ball, like, they can just frustrate teams, and then they wait for your mistakes, I guess. And teams just seem to make a lot more mistakes against them in the box. And the games are tight as well. Like, a lot of the times, if they're winning, it's like 1-0 cagey games. So teams defensively are a little bit more on edge, because as the game goes on longer, they're a bit more like wary of making mistakes. They tighten up a bit, they get a bit more nervous, and Anderlecht seem to be able to exploit that. But yeah, I think it's a shame for him that he hasn't scored more goals from open play, because like you said, when you look at the stats, you're like, oh, it's just penalty goals, and yeah, great composure, but what else do you bring to the table? But I think he definitely, if he wasn't there, they would struggle a lot more, especially going forward. I think he is the spearhead of the attack, and I've been really impressed with him.
Yeah, he's very much a focal point, and I'll tell you what, that's a bold call. I completely glossed over that before. The fact that he said he wants to, or at least he's insinuated that he wants to compete for a place at Manchester City. Which fair enough. You know what, I quite like that the player's got the confidence, and maybe it might not work out, but hey, at the end of the day, he's not exactly done himself any harm by scoring regularly in Belgium and sort of endearing himself to the fan base of one of Belgium's most well supported clubs. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. But on sort of the Manchester City thing with Vincent Kompany being the head coach, can you see a partnership perhaps being struck in future with more players coming to Anderlecht because of that company link from Manchester City, or will the relationship, the ownership essentially that they have of Lommel, is that going to complicate things if Lommel end up getting promoted?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because obviously there have been those links, and I think it's weird in the way that some of the other players they've brought in haven't been from City. So they brought in Matt Miesga, and I presume that is Kompany working. He knows Matt Miesga from having seen him play for Chelsea and teams like that. Like, he'll just know that he's a player that he can rely on. Josh Cullen as well, they brought in from West Ham. So there's that. I think there will be a link to the Premier League. I'm not sure whether, like you said, I don't know whether it's going to be with City because of Lommel. But then again, it depends. Like, if Lommel don't get out of the second tier, because it is difficult to get out of the second tier. Like, it's not the easiest thing. It depends how much City want. It depends how City want to use Lommel, I guess. Because it may be that, like, a player like Lemaitre, it'd have been a complete waste of time for him to go to Lommel. Like, he's clearly too good for that level. Like, the level he'd have been at is the Belgian Pro League. He's shown that, like, he'd have scored goals for fun and it wouldn't have helped him. So maybe they can kind of exploit those players that are like City are thinking, okay, we don't want them to go into a second tier team. We want them to go play at a higher level in a team that could actually eventually compete at the higher end of a league for a guy that we trust. So I think, yeah, he probably could work that. But also, because they've got their own young players and stuff like that, it's like, is that actually good for the club? Should they just actually be focusing on their own youngsters because they need to kind of get money out of them and stuff? So it's kind of like, yeah, like how much of it do you rely on, or do you just, like, you pick up Lemaitre because you needed a striker? Like, use it when you need it, but don't use it to kind of become a feeder club, I guess, or like a second City team that, like, helps them out too much and doesn't actually help Anderlecht out.
Yeah, I think that relationship dynamic will be interesting to keep an eye on. In terms of recent departures, obviously we've discussed how Anderlecht use their academy as sort of a conveyor belt to actually generate income, and that's obviously going to be a big part of where their revenue comes from essentially. And in the summer just past, they sold Jeremy Doku, who was a fantastic young winger. After only about a season's worth of first team minutes, 25 million euros signed by Rennes in Liga, and that's quite an outlay for a Liga 1 side who typically, I mean, they did qualify for the Champions League, which is obviously where that funding came from. But it was quite an investment in a young player, still a teenager from essentially the back of one season at Anderlecht. In terms of the Belgian perspective, was it a move celebrated by Anderlecht, or was it one of those where I thought, well, we're reluctant to let you go, but this money is too good to turn down at this moment in time, given our financial situation?
Yeah, I think that's the second point is like 100% true. I think with Doku, it was like, from a neutral point of view, I thought it was a great move for everyone involved. Because I think, having watched a bit of Rennes, you see they're good with like young players and stuff like that. For them, obviously, they then sold Rafinha, so they needed someone to come in. Doku's like a young replacement for him. For him, it's a great move because it's a step up into a side that, like, kind of like we said with Lukonga, like a team pushing Europa League and maybe Champions League every now and then. I think it was a really good move. And financially for Anderlecht, they just needed the money. The situation is that 25 million euros, they can't really turn that down at the moment for a player like Doku. And like you said, after one season, you're kind of like, is this the best time to sell? Because what if he doesn't have another good season and then his price drops, which you've actually seen from another player in the league. If we look at Emmanuel Dennis, like, massively hyped when he scored those goals against Real Madrid. Everyone was talking about him, and his value since, because he just hasn't done it for Club Brugge this season at all, he's just completely plummeted. So there's always that risk. I also think Anderlecht's reputation academy reputation does actually stand him in good stead, because you can look at him and you can say, okay, he's come from academy that's produced this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. You can just like reel off the list of players and be like, okay, it's a safer bet because you can trust where he's been in the situation he's been in. Like, they're so good at developing professional footballers that I think for Rennes, I think it's a great investment. I think for Anderlecht, it was a good deal. And I think for the player, it was a great move.
Absolutely. I think that's pretty much how I would have summed it up, really. It was a mutually beneficial transfer, and that's how sort of we at Scouted viewed that over the summer. And sort of looking to the future, Vincent Kompany's obviously there. He's very much in the infancy of his coaching career. Do you see perhaps a changing of the guard essentially at Anderlecht, where the expenditure that they've made over the past few seasons, which hasn't worked out, they're gonna completely change tack and say, hand the keys essentially to Kompany and say, bring through this next generation of Anderlecht youth team players, develop the next Lukaku, Tielemans, Dries, Mertens, those types of players under your tutelage, with, of course, your reputation playing a big part in that. Is that something you could perhaps see for the future if they manage to, they look like they're going to improve on last season's eighth place. And obviously if they break back into the top four, obviously comes the finances that come with European competition. Is that something that you could perhaps see in the future? Vincent Kompany playing a starring role as a not just a player there, but also as a manager now.
I really hope so. But if I'm honest, I'm not sure. Like, the problem you have at Anderlecht is, like we've said earlier in the show, about how successful they are as a club. Like, this is one of, if not the biggest club in Belgium. Like, this club is massive. They must be competing. Like, to have like 2 or 3 seasons of not competing, I don't think you can survive that, even if you're Vincent Kompany. So I think you have to be able to show, like, you're kind of treading two kind of sides where you're trying to financially sort yourself out, but you still need to be competitive because that's what's expected of you. Like, you're Anderlecht, you're like this massive club. You have to be exciting, you have to be entertaining, you have to be like pushing the top teams. And I think fans will probably understand at the moment like why this isn't happening, because of the financial situation and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, like, at some point they're going to have to kind of balance between these young guys and having good experienced players that aren't on massive amounts of money. So I think it's going to take some like frugal investment and kind of being a little bit cleverer in the transfer window in who you bring in and like where you reinvest this money that you do get in. And also, like, kind of like I said earlier, like eking every little bit that you can out of these young talented players like Lukonga to be successful. Because you need to get into the European places as Anderlecht. Like, no matter what, you should still be able to do that with the players at your disposal. And you kind of look around the rest of the league and there's other clubs in sort of a similar situation. So their rivals, basically Standard Liège, are in a very similar situation, but their problem is they don't have the youngsters to sell like Anderlecht do. They don't have the talented youngsters coming through like Anderlecht do. So Anderlecht fans will be looking and saying, well, we should be doing better than Standard Liège because our youngsters are better. We can sell more players than them. We should be competing more than they are at the top end of the league. So yeah, kind of like bringing it back around to the kind of question as a whole. I think Vincent Kompany, he will get given more time than anyone else because of who he is. And personally, I really hope that he gets enough time to turn it around and that he can kind of change everything there and like put things in place so that this financial situation that they're in like, never happens again. And it'd be really nice to see him like develop as a manager and go on to big things. And I think there's been like a trend, hasn't there, of people hiring legends as managers, and like we saw with Juventus the other day, like it doesn't always work. Like sacking someone like Sarri, like experienced manager who's won stuff, and replacing him with someone who doesn't necessarily like have the same coaching experience. I think Vincent Kompany's a little bit different. I think he's shown this year that he can coach and tactically he can be innovative and like try and work things out as the season's gone on. And the team has improved. Like he's improved on last season. He's improved the team as the season's gone on this year. I hope he gets given the time, but it's Anderlecht. There's so much pressure there.
Yeah, I think that was kind of the thing that I kept coming back to. One of the things about Anderlecht that's always been pretty clear is just how enthusiastic, how fervent the fan base is. It's not too many clubs have ultras that are as notorious as Anderlecht's, especially in Belgium. So yeah, there's I think if he's given the time, I hope. I mean, I can't say with any sort of authority that he will. But yeah, essentially what you've been saying, Ben. I hope that the club can reclaim the heights that they were once at, especially domestically, if not in European terms. But that is all from this week's instalment. We'll be back with more under-23 football chatter in the coming weeks and months. No doubt some of that Belgian orientated. No doubt some of that Albert Sambi Lukonga as well. In the meantime, do check out the Scouted Football Handbook if you'd like to read features, interviews, profiles, and long-form football analysis in print, as well as checking out Scouted Football on YouTube. To those of you who've been sending us pics of Volume 9, keep them coming. We love to see them arriving safely, stickers and all. But the last thing to do is to say thank you very much to Ben for bringing his insight and his expertise to today's podcast. Where can people find you on the Belgian Football Podcast?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. You can find us, on Twitter. If you just search Belgian Football Podcast, you'll find us there. We're on Instagram and Facebook as well. And our podcast is, it's on all the streaming sites. My personal Twitter's at benjack94. So, if you want to talk Belgian football, I'm always interested.
Absolutely, and I can't recommend that highly enough. Thank you very much for tuning in. I've been Joe Donoghue. This has been the Scouted Football Podcast. See you next week. Bye-bye.